Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of your body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If the light within you is darkness, how great that darkness is! No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and your body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you, that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If this is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble on its own.
Thanks, Wallace. I invite you all to take a seat. Well, hello again, I'm Fiona. I'm on staff here at Syndal, and great to be here with you all today. We are going to be starting today a 4-week series exploring the 4th of 9 practices that Jesus himself practiced and taught about. So last year we started these practices. We started a 3-year adventure through them using material from a ministry called Practicing the Way, which is largely shaped and led by a pastor called John Mark Comer, who's really passionate about spiritual formation, so how we are shaped and grown in faith and in life. Last year, we looked at the practices of Sabbath, prayer, and Scripture. But as we kick into our 2nd year of these practices, I thought it would be a good chance to revisit the why behind it all. Why, as a church, are we pouring so much attention and investment into these practices? Why should we, as individuals, consider trying them out in our life, implementing them possibly across a lifetime? In John 15, Jesus says, "Remain in me, as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself, it must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." The song we just sung references this passage, but it uses the word abide instead of remain. Abide in me, remain in me. I think many of us know this passage and love this passage from the Bible. I think at an intuitive level, we know that it makes sense. It makes sense that we need to stay close to Jesus, stay connected to Jesus, if we're going to follow him, if we're going to follow him well, and if we're going to bear fruit. But I think for many of us, the challenge is the how. How do we remain in him? How do we abide? How do we practically do that in everyday life? The house that I grew up in was a 2-story house, and I remember we had this beautiful grapevine that grew all over the deck. So from the ground on the bottom level, it wove its way up around the posts and then over all the handrails. And in spring and summer, it was beautiful and green, and there were grapes on it. The grapes were horrible, but they looked beautiful. And then in autumn and winter, they would change colour. Autumn, red and yellow, and then they would fall. And it was just this amazing, amazing grapevine that I really miss. And so when we read Jesus' words about him being the vine and us being the branches, this is the picture that I see in my head. But in that picture, where do the practices fit. Because they're not the fruit. Doing these 9 practices doesn't make us good or real Christians. They aren't measures for how spiritual we are. They're not rules to follow, and they're definitely not laws to obey. What they are is they're more like the posts and the handrails that grapevine grew up and around and which supported it as it grew. These 9 practices are basically structures to help us organise our lives around Jesus. I think for the most part, we are taught by this world to organise our lives around our careers, families, around our goals and dreams or things we want to buy. And so even when we have chosen to follow Jesus, we can then try and do that, try and follow him and maintain a relationship with him in the margins left around those things. And over time, I think we can feel the effects of that. Our relationship with Jesus can start feeling dry or distant. We might find that years pass, months or years pass, and we look back and go, man, I haven't grown at all in that time. And for some of us, we can find ourselves slowly drifting away from him entirely. These practices can help us organise or reorganise our lives around Jesus. They help create habits and rhythms that keep bringing us back to him, to be with him, to become like him, and to do as he did. A little word of warning, whenever we start any of these practices for the first time, they often feel pretty hard and weird and a little bit clunky. And that is understandable when you think that we're kind of shifting our centre of gravity in the way that we approach life. But over time, as we settle into them, these practices can become rhythms and habits that help us bear fruit in our lives. We settle into them. These aren't new ideas, they're actually really old and practiced by many generations of believers before us. There'll be people in this room who have practiced some or all of them for a very long time. And then for others, it's really new information that we're just getting our heads around. But wherever we are on that journey, there's space for all of us to move forward together. If you are pretty new to Syndal, you might have missed some of the practices we covered last year and you'd like to catch up. Well, you can watch any of the sermons from the last series last year and access a whole bunch of resources about practicing the way via sb.org.au/practices. And our life groups will be tracking through material to go alongside this series. And that'll be a really, really great place to wrestle through some of the questions that come up for it, to look at how it applies to life in practical ways. And if you're not in a life group, but you would love that opportunity to work through this stuff with others, then we do have practice groups, which are running for the series. It's like a short-term life group, and you can still sign up for one of those today via our Connect link at me.sb.org.au. So, with all of that said, let's talk about generosity, our first practice for 2026. I've got to be honest with you, I don't feel like I'm a particularly generous person. I don't. And I wonder if you do. I wonder if someone asked you, are you generous? Are you a generous person? How you would answer that. How do we even go about assessing that? Is it a feeling like you feel generous because you do all these things that make you feel like, oh, I'll give to that, so it makes you feel generous? Or is it a cognitive thing based on how much you give or how often you give? Is that what it is? Or is it just a trick question? Like, if you ask someone if they're humble and they say yes, it's like an instant fail. Is it, are you generous? And if you say yes, it's not a great sign. Is it like that? I don't know. For me, I've been thinking that possibly one of the reasons I don't feel like a generous person is, I think for me and Jace, my husband, a lot of our giving is planned in advance, and we kind of work our budget around that. And while we do try to respond to spontaneous needs that come up, I feel like that's a lot harder because it messes with the plan. And so that's a really big growth area, I think, for me. But then I think there will be people in this room who are the exact opposite, who are like amazing at the spontaneous giving, like, oh, someone can't pay their bills, I'm going to put an envelope of cash in their mailbox, or, oh no, there's bushfires, I'm going to give to that, or meeting needs all over the place, and that's your sweet spot. But for you, maybe the opposite is really scary, committing to giving something, budgeting around it, and having to live off less. Maybe that freaks you out, because what if a big bill comes up? What then? Some of us in this room will be amazing at both, and I'm sure you have some pretty great stories about how you've come to be that way. And then there'll be people in this room who struggle to get anything at all, and also probably because of stories you have for why you feel that way, things you've experienced in life. And you won't be alone in that either. I think it's fair to say that we'll all be in different places with generosity as we start this series. And so as we start, maybe the most important question to ask isn't, am I generous? But do I want to be? Do I want to be more generous? And I realise that even that can be a pretty scary and uncomfortable question. We can worry about what that might mean for us and how we live. We might already be feeling so stretched at the moment that the thought of possibly being expected or challenged to give more creates this deep anxiety in us. Some of us here might have been burned by organisations or individuals who we have given money to in good faith, and they have misused it. Even churches, even our church. So I want to be clear up front that this series is not a series about giving to the church. It's about developing a practice of generosity in really broad terms. Will giving to the church be referred to in this series? Yes, because it's helpful to understand how giving to the church fits into generosity, especially as a group of people who belong to a church. But it won't be the focus of any of the sermons. And yes, while generosity can be all sorts of things like time and service, we're going to be focusing on money in this series because that is often where a lot of us struggle the most to give. I hope that helps us all relax a little bit, maybe even just a little bit, and open ourselves up to consider some of Jesus' teachings about generosity and how, rather than being a burdensome or heavy thing, it can actually be really good for us. And apparently, generosity is good for us. There was a study conducted where a group of people were set aside and they were told that they were going to be given a small amount of money, about $25 each week for 4 weeks. And half the group were told that they had to spend that money on other people, buy a meal, give a gift, help someone out. And the other half were told that they had to spend that money on themselves. And throughout the course of the experiment, the people measured both the physiological impacts, like, I'm not sciencey, but like brain chemicals and stuff, and then the other half, and then they were also measuring the spoken responses, like the felt responses, how people said they felt in doing generous things or not. And at the end of the study, the results confirmed that those who used the money on others rather than themselves measured higher levels of happiness on both accounts. There are numerous studies, actually heaps when I looked it up, worldwide, that show the exact same results. Research worldwide agrees that generous people are generally healthier and happier people. But really, science and research is just catching up to what Jesus said about 2,000 years ago. It's more blessed to give than receive. That Greek word for blessed there actually means like happy or fortunate. So it's actually happier to give than receive. It's good for us to be generous. But why? Why does Jesus say that? In his Sermon on the Mount, which we read in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus offers, in this little section of teaching that Wallace read out before, he offers a couple of answers. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. A whole sermon could be preached on just these verses, and I'm not going to camp on this today because it's going to be sort of explored a bit more throughout the rest of the series, but I did just want to share a thought about it. I don't know, we've probably got a few young families here in the room. I don't know if this is a conversation that you have in your households or maybe you remember having at some point, but an argument we keep having on repeat in our house is that my boys want to spend their pocket money on really dumb stuff. Like dumb stuff. Last weekend, I was taking one of my sons to a birthday party at Inflatable World, which is fun enough, but he wanted to take some coins of his pocket money to spend on those stupid, like, gumball machines, but with toys, or bouncy balls. We have a box full of, 50 bouncy balls that never get played with, but for some reason they always want more. Or they dispense these little plastic figurines, and you just know, like, you are going to get sick of that in 2 minutes, or it's going to break, or you're going to lose it, or you'll take it to school and it'll fall out of your bag. And we have this conversation like, don't waste your money on dumb stuff. But they never listen. They never listen. And look, it's not a very spiritual way to say it, but I kind of feel like that's what Jesus is saying to us. Like, don't spend our money on dumb stuff. And I say this as someone who spends their money on dumb stuff. Like, I'm not taking myself out of this. But I feel like with his eternal perspective on things, he's advising us the same sort of thing. Like, don't treasure things that are not going to last. Don't build your life around things that can be lost, that will break, that can be stolen, that we'll lose interest in 2 weeks from now, or 2 years from now, or 2 decades from now. And just like my kids, I still find myself doing that. But Jesus instead says, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. The Greek word heaven here actually kind of means God, like references God, essentially treasure God. Treasure the things of God, treasure the things God treasures. You know, those things will last, those things won't lose value. It's an invitation for us to step back and look at what we treasure, what we spend our money on, how we use it from the perspective of a Father who can see much more far and long and wide than we can. Jesus continues, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? In this really confusing little passage, the Greek word rendered healthy actually implies generous, and the word rendered unhealthy actually implies stingy. So rereading it with those words, it says, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are generous, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are stingy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? So what's Jesus saying? Basically, healthy eyes, or generous eyes, they look out at the world and they see abundance. They see plenty. They think, I have enough, I will have enough, there is enough, so I don't need to hold on tightly to what I have, but interact generously with this world around me. This is sometimes referred to as an abundance mindset, and if you see the world that way, your whole being will be full of light. Having a generous view of the world is good for you. On the other hand, unhealthy or stingy eyes look out at the world and see scarcity. You know, this one is shaped by fear. There isn't enough. I don't have enough. I won't have enough. I need to grab whatever I can and hold onto it tightly to protect myself. And Jesus says living that way results in us being filled with darkness. It's not going to be good for us. 2 ways to view the world. With generous eyes, a worldview of abundance, and with stingy eyes, a worldview of scarcity. One is good for us and one is not. But then we get to the hard part. It's the how. It's the how. Again, if we know that we find ourselves looking at the world with that kind of scarcity mindset, I'm not going to have enough. And we know that we grab and hold on to things and out of fear. The question is, how do we change that? How do we get out of that? And so the last part of this section of Jesus' teaching, I think, really addresses that question. Jesus names it. He says, do not worry. He names the fear and anxiety that so many of us wrestle with. What will I eat? What will I drink? What will I wear? Maybe for you, it's how will I pay this bill? Where will I live? Will I have what I need to retire? I believe that Jesus' answer here actually lays a really important, in fact, a crucial foundation for the practice of generosity. For everything else that we are going to look at through this series, it has to be built on this idea. In this beautiful section, Jesus tells his followers to look around, like what Steph did in her opening, like look around. Look at the birds and the flowers. Look whose world you're living in. God created it all. He holds it all. And if he can hold all of that in his hands, then of course he holds you, his child, made in his image, who he gave his son to save. Our Father in heaven is generous. It's who he is. The other day, I was out somewhere. I don't remember where, but I remember seeing a mum with her 2 or 3 year old kid, and she was there with her massive nappy bag. And any parents who've been there, you know the massive nappy bag. The people in the cry room know the massive nappy bag. I had one, and it made me think back to those years when my kids were little and we'd be at play centres or playgrounds, and I'd be there with my huge nappy bag, and it had everything you could possibly need. And I remember, my kid coming up to me and saying, "Mum, I'm hungry," and you'd pull one of the 5 snacks you've packed out and give it to them. They'd go away. 5 minutes later, they'd come back, "Mum, I'm thirsty," and you'd pull out their drink bottle, send them on their way. Then they'd fall over. You'd pull out the baby wipes and the Band-Aids and fix them up and send them away. And then you'd be at a cafe and they'd be causing all sorts of trouble, so you'd pull out toy cars to distract them for a while. Or they'd fall in mud and you'd have a spare change of clothes, and you just have everything that they could possibly need. And because of this, my kids never hesitated to come to me and say, "Mum, this is what I want, this is what I need," because they just assumed I would have what they needed. Just assumed it. And I remember distinctly being at a play centre years ago thinking, man, how nice would it be to never have to worry about anything because your mum and dad's all sorted for it. They've prepared for it. And in that moment, it occurred to me, that's how we're meant to feel about God. That's how we're meant to feel about God. That's the picture that Jesus is painting in this passage. A loving father who knows his kids so well. He knows what they need when they need it, and he can be trusted to provide. Saying that, I want to acknowledge that for some of us, those words are really hard to hear because that's not what it's felt like in our life. There might be a whole lot of, but what about this or that time? They might be popping into your mind right now, and it is completely understandable and valid. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a second. But Jesus' teaching here, while far from easy, is relatively simple. The way our vision can be healed from fear and scarcity to abundance and trust and generosity is to know who our Father is, to know what he's like, to know what he's capable of, and to know that he loves us. I think so often we get so caught up in all the details of giving. How much should I give? When should I give? Do I give too much? Do I give enough? Should I give more? But I think we miss one of the most important and beautiful things about the practice of generosity. That at its core, it is an opportunity into deeper relationship with our Father. In my life, some of the clearest and most personal moments of connection with God are moments where he is tangibly shown, he's shown up and he's moved in my life. And it's been related to money and resources and giving. It's either been in making a hard choice to give and knowing that'll cost us, but stepping out in faith, or because we have faced times of need, partly that could have been avoided if we gave less or didn't give, or because we follow his call into some new area and we're going to take a hit to our income because of it. And I have a lot of stories actually about those things, but I'm going to share one with you today. In March of last year, we had some really big expenses come over the horizon, all at once, as they like to do. And I was pretty worried and stressed about them. One of those costs was actually related to a minor surgery that I had needed for a while. I'd been on 2 separate waiting lists for 3 years for this issue to be dealt with. And I'd been able to live with the situation for that long, but it was getting to the point where it really needed to be sorted out. Unless I was called by the public system, I was going to have to go through the private system, which would have cost a fair bit of money. Now, we would have been able to make it work, but it was putting a lot of pressure. It would have put a lot of pressure on us financially. And like I so often do, and maybe you do as well, when all those costs mount up at once, I was doing all the maths. And I'm bad at maths, but I was doing the maths, looking at all the accounts and trying to figure out how I could move money around and make it work. But one morning I was out walking and praying to God about these expenses and these worries, when out of nowhere this story from the Old Testament popped into my head, out of nowhere. And I really believe it was God putting it there, because it was pretty random. It's a story about one of Israel's kings called King Hezekiah. And in this story, he receives this letter from an army commander who is marching on Jerusalem. And this letter is basically taunting him and saying, we've just destroyed everyone else and we're coming for you next. You don't have a chance. Your God can't save you. You may as well give up now. And Hezekiah, he takes that letter into the temple in Jerusalem and he lays it out before God and basically says, God, we can't do this, but you can. We need your help. And long story short, God does help. And so while I'm on this walk, I have this really strong sense I need to go home and write down specifically what our needs are at that time, and lay them out to God and ask for his help. And so that's what I did. A couple of days later, I just parked. I'm talking like 2 or 3 days later. It was about that time. I was just parked at Woolworths, and I got out of my car and I got this phone call. And I answered. Hi there, this is Beck from Blackburn Public Hospital. We've just set up a new clinic and we're going through all the people who have been on waiting lists for a really long time. And that looks like you. Do you still need an appointment? Why, yes, I do. I reckon the next week, Jace came home from work one day, he's a teacher, and he said, so the finance lady called me into her office today and she said, apparently because of one of the leadership roles I'm playing, I'm entitled to a stipend, which they haven't been paying. So they're going to back pay me for 4 months and my pay will go up from here. And then, I reckon the same week, one of the expenses that was forecast, and I thought it would be a lot, turned out to be pretty little. And just one by one, God met each of the needs that I had written down on that list and offered to him. Yes, I think so. But it's interesting because saying a story like this, it can evoke different responses like that, where you go, oh my gosh, God's amazing, how cool is that? But for others, it can make us feel really sad and confused and angry because you go, but he didn't do that for me. I've been praying for this thing for a long time and he hasn't met that need. What about me? And that's completely understandable too. And so I really want to point out a few things about this story. The first thing is you need to know I had been praying for this for 3 years. I'd been praying for that surgery for 3 years. I don't know why God decided to answer it in this way and at this time, and I may never know. The second thing is I have prayed for many things over my life where he hasn't given me what I wanted. For whatever reason, he's decided I don't need it. And I've had to wrestle with some pretty big feelings of disappointment and confusion because sometimes God says no. And what do we do with that? And lastly, I have to say that God has provided for us in pretty cool ways over the years, but this was the first time, and so far the last, that he asked me to write it down and offer it to him this way. This is not a formula for how you get God to give you what you want. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is it was an invitation into conversation. It wasn't about a formula, it was about a conversation with my good Father. I think this whole thing was an invitation to grow closer to him as I worked through this stuff, to listen for his voice and to act in faith when he prompted me, to participate with him in the process of provision. And it helped me see him in a new way as a father who wants me to come to him with my needs and see him provide. The practice of generosity and how we use our money more broadly is an opportunity to grow closer to our Father. Over the years, as me and Jace have met various needs, some of those needs we could have sorted out ourselves by pausing our giving or stopping our giving. But for us, giving is an act of faith that actually pushes us to rely on God. Doesn't mean it's never the right thing to pause giving or stop, I'm not going to say that, but it drives us to run to him for our needs. It drives us to wrestle with him when he says no. It drives us to build trust in him in stepping out in faith and seeing him work in tangible ways. And maybe you've experienced that yourself at various times. Sometimes we forget about them. They, fade away into the distant past. I hope that during this series they'll come to mind and encourage you again. Maybe you feel like you've never experienced God like that, but you want to. Maybe you've always perceived generosity as something that you're obligated to do or expected to do, a box to tick rather than an opportunity draw closer to God. Maybe you've never thought as generosity as a relational thing, but you'd like it to be. I have no doubt that there are all sorts of questions rolling around in people's minds right now. There always are when it comes to money and giving. And the good news is we've got 3 more weeks of pondering all of this together in services and life groups and practice groups. We've even put together a reflection resource that you can use in the next 4 weeks to bring some of these thoughts to God and process them. And I'll talk a bit more about that at the end of the service. But one thing I want to say as we embark on this journey together is that while Jesus teaches that generosity is good for all of us, what that looks like and how that works won't be the same for all of us. We might all be walking in the same direction, all walking north, but God might take us on different paths to get there. There will be some questions which come up in this series which will be specific to you. There'll be questions that only God can answer. And that's why this invitation to deeper relationship with Him in this practice is so important. And so that's how I want to finish today, to give you the chance to invite God to use this practice of generosity to draw you closer to Him. So if you're comfortable, I invite you to close your eyes and put your hands in your lap, facing up. Bring to mind the needs that you have right now and any worries you have about money and provision, all those sorts of tumultuous things, and imagine them floating out of your mind and settling into your hands. Now think about the money and resources you do have. The money in your account, your paycheck every fortnight or monthly, your spending, your savings, all of it. And imagine that moving and settling into your hands as well. Then think about those big questions that you have, those fears, those doubts that you've been carrying, those experiences from the past. And imagine those settling into your hands too. Now, holding all of these things, this really big area of life before you and before God, if you would like to grow closer to God through these things, through this area of life, if you would like to experience Him in new ways in these areas of life, then you can tell Him that's what you want. In your mind and your heart, simply say, Father, in all of these things, help me grow closer to you. Father, in all of these things, help me grow closer to you. Lord, you see the open hearts and hands before you. You also know those who are still unsure and hesitant, and you love them just the same. I pray, Lord, that all who have asked for you to help them grow closer to you through money, provision, and generosity, that their prayer may be answered in really clear and transformative ways in the weeks and years ahead. As we journey together, Lord, help us not judge one another, but encourage one another on the path forward. Lord, we ask that over the weeks ahead, you help us become more like Jesus. Show us the truth of his statement. It is more blessed to give than receive. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.